Anyway, our speaker this morning is Kenton Seth of Western Colorado, as Charlie said. He gardens in an area that gets only 8 to 12 inches of rain per year. So one of his focus points in gardening and landscaping in Great Mountain is gardening with plants that don't need much water. He's also fascinated with crevice gardening, which he's going to demonstrate today, as you've heard already. He's interested in native plants, also growing plants from seed, as well as plant hunting. Now, he's here today to tell us about a trip he took in 2010 to Turkey, Armenia, and Georgia, in which he's going to tell us about the people and the plants he met in the Caucasus. And then, of course, at 1 o'clock, he's giving the other talk. This is his first trip to North Carolina. He's leaving on Monday to go up to Asheville to speak to the Rock Garden chapter up there, and will be helping Ev Whitmore, some of you know her, put together a wheelbarrow, among other things.
Highlight of the trip.
Right, that's going to be the highlight of the trip. Kim's motto, in case you haven't heard, is his motto, his blog, and his email address is "I need a cup of tea." So please welcome Kenton Seth.
Well, I want to start by thanking everybody and asking you guys to do some thinking on your own. I'll explain in a second. Thank all of you guys for driving out and leaving your warm homes this morning, for coming to this talk, and thank you, Charlie, for being an awesome host. We found we have a kinship for Indian food, and thank you, Bobby, for scraping the bottom of the barrel of national speakers and getting me out here. This is my first time this side of the Mississippi, and first time speaking out of my state, so you guys are guinea pigs. Hopefully you understand my accent, being from so far away. But I also want you guys to reflect for a second what gardening has brought to your lives. For me, it's been coming to North Carolina and seeing this amazing place and meeting all kinds of amazing, incredible people. But the first time I started thinking about what horticulture's brought to my life was standing at the top of a ladder trying to pollinate yucca elata with my friend Greg holding the ladder because 50-mile-an-hour winds were blowing gravel in our faces with this beautiful sunset going on. And I thought, this gardening stuff's kind of exciting, you know? It's taken me around the world and had so much adventure. And for other folks, gardening could be my friend Bob, who lost his wife a couple years ago. Rock gardening specifically gives him a reason to wake up in the morning, a reason to communicate with people, and his rock garden buddies come over and visit him and keep him from being isolated. So think about what just gardening in general has done for you, directly or indirectly. It's pretty amazing, and I think it enriches our lives so deeply. My last thanks is I want to dedicate this talk to one of my mentors, Mr. Alan Taylor, who's 82, I think, and still running circles around me. He does a big circuit of the Southwest, picking up oak, acorns, and scion wood, and also has a fascination for this ericaceous shrub, the manzanita, which is mostly a Californian thing, but a bit of them make it into Colorado. And he's trying to get these into cultivation in the Intermountain West. And he got me interested in the manzanitas as well, but more so introduced me to plant hunting, the concept of going out into nature and getting plants from where they originally came from. Fancy that. It's got probably the best woody plant garden I've seen in Colorado, if not the Intermountain West. You guys give him a run for his money out here, I tell you what. And that's one of the manzanitas there, Pringle's manzanita in Utah. And he's, I'm not the only student of Alan's. This is Alan over here on the top left in an old family photo. And his little brother-in-law, he married Mary here, his little brother-in-law, at the time known as Pete Callis, he set him in charge of keeping his rock garden when he and Mary moved up to California for work. And little child Pete Callis took care of the rock garden while Alan was away. Most of you people know Pete as Panayote Kelidis now. So Alan's inflicted us all with some good things. But I'm here to talk about the Caucasus today. The Caucasus. So it's a post-Soviet country, if you will. It used to be under the USSR, so it has that flavor everywhere you go. But the flowers is really what interested me. I wouldn't know about the Caucasus. I wouldn't have even been there if it weren't for the flowers. For instance, this beautiful Armenian, this is an Iris paradoxa in Onchocyclus division. If it weren't for this beautiful Armenian that I was growing in my home garden in Colorado, An Armenian flourishing in American situations. Other Armenians flourishing in American situations. This is what most people think of when they think of Armenian. But this gentleman emailed me many years ago when my only garden experience and education was online, and he's a tulip collector in a small village in northern Armenia. At the time I was collecting tulips as well, and we started correspondence, and it's basically his fault that I wound up going there. I wanted to see Girard's garden in full bloom, his tulip collection, part of it on his grandparents' roof in buckets. I wanted to see his tulip collection blooming before I got stuck in some career. Careers, boy, they really tie you down. So do take a trip with me to the Caucasus. Of the mountain ranges in the world, and there's a lot. I mean, Nevada itself has 300 named mountain ranges, so the rest of the world is anyone's guess, depending on how you define mountain range. Why are the Caucasus important? This is where they are, just for reference. They're important because of climate, but I'll cover that in a minute. They're famous to us as humans because of Sochi. Anybody a fan of the Olympics? Anybody hear about that? And that's the greater Caucasus, that blue blob. And the lesser Caucasus in the Armenian plateau, that lower blue blob, is famous because of Mount Ararat. Is anyone a fan of Noah's Ark? Maybe? Yeah, the Caucasus is kind of a Goldilocks mountain range. Yes, the mountain range has high alpine peaks and lowland and even maritime climates involved with it. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around North Carolina's climate, but I'm starting to think that you guys are pretty similar to Batumi and the Black Sea coast, and maybe even Sochi, part of this sort of trough here. I think you guys have something in common with that climate there. Getting pretty close. By and large, the greater Caucasus, that snowy mountain range, is pinched in between two seas, the Black on the left and the Caspian on the right, and two continents, Eurasia to the north and Asia Minor or Africa to the south. So you have these two dry forces, north and south, and two wet forces, which all kind of come together, which gives a great opportunity for microclimates, but it also is kind of mixing the ingredients together and making it the Goldilocks, the happy medium, the just right zone for temperate garden plant evolution, if you will. This sort of happy medium provided a lot of plants that are used in horticulture today, some of them for a very long time. And I'll start with those, like peonies. Peonies have a wide distribution, but Peony tenuifolia, is anybody growing those? How much are peonies grown here? Yeah, so. Yeah. They're widely grown in the northern hemisphere in temperate climates. They're incredibly important garden plant. And Viburnum lantana is a pretty common garden plant among the viburnums. And cyclamen comb, who doesn't know this plant, it comes from the Caucasus as well. And this is where it's growing. If you ever wondered why it grows well in the heavy competition of trees, it's where we use it in Colorado, where nothing else will grow in the dense tree competition, is that's where it's growing in nature, is right under shrubs, right under tree roots. And there's a species of hedera there as well. I know that might be a bad word here. Heterocolchicus probably would be a bad word as well. It's a bigger plant. And there it is growing next to some tree-carved graffiti and the Cartuli language that the Georgians use. This is an ubiquitous plant, a nefarious, an infamous plant in the Pacific Northwest. Although in nature it looks a little different than the weed of the Pacific Northwest. Daphne mesoreum, is this commonly grown here? Is it? We have a couple growers in the room of it. And this is where it's native to. It's so amazing to see a common garden plant doing its thing out in the forest. I mean, it might be less uncommon for you guys living next to forest. And things I didn't even know existed. Peonies with red leaves when they first emerged. Humans have been there for a very long time, and that's part of the reason we have a lot of plants from the Caucasus, is that humans were digging them up from nature and growing them in gardens, and they kept moving with humans. And the human element is still very much a big part of why we've heard of the Caucasus. Might be Abkhazia or Chechnya. That's in the North Caucasus because of political strife. And I think, was this 2008, 2004, Russia and Georgia had a war. By the way, the Republic of Georgia is probably the country with most of the Caucasus in it. So Russia and Georgia had a war, and Georgia went to war with one of the largest countries on the planet, so they didn't stand a chance. And it took 4 days for the Russians to squash everything going on, and one of the states of Georgia is now under Russian control. In the meantime, the refugees were living in these camps. When I went by back in this refugee camp, they'd reclaimed it and it was full of corn. It was totally surreal to see basically a cornfield supplanted on top of this refugee camp in the middle of Georgia. But then, human actions continuing to happen there. The place is not all war zone, it really isn't. I felt completely safe. You don't need a visa to go to Georgia. When they come and see your American passport, they smile and stamp it, say, "Welcome to Georgia." You can stay as long as you want, I think. Now, it's a beautiful place, it really is. I like their way of living in high-rises, even if they're in the mountains. It takes up less rangeland. The people themselves, I think they look a bit depressing, but that's only because I come from a very colorful, mixed culture. Everyone loves to wear black. They say it's because it's clean and it goes with everything. That doesn't explain why they drink so much. They still manage to look dour, even when they're holding a box of cake and have fashionable clothing. They still look really dourful. But they're super friendly as well. Humans have been in the Caucasus for an extra long time. As I mentioned before, I have no idea how old these ruins are, which are right up in the mountains, just a stone's throw from the Russian border. I don't know how old these are, but guessing from the lichens and mosses, not recent. Looks like it was a little village there. So I guess I'm going to start low and go up in elevation. This steppe includes prairie. The term steppe, I believe, that comes from Russian, and it's a treeless environment. And it doesn't specify why it's treeless. In the Caucasus, it's because of the human presence there. Armenia used to be full of trees way back in the day. Now there are very few forests left in Armenia, and it mostly looks like this. There's some forest patches where grazing isn't great. Humans have cut down the trees, or in the case of North America, the Native Americans lit fires. In other places, there's just not enough precipitation to support trees. So steppe is this treeless landscape, which can be grass, it can be prairie, it can be shrubs, but they have all of these in the Caucasus. And one of the drier ones, the Fragana, I believe, or I've heard other pronunciations of it, is where there's not a whole lot of grasses, but a lot of little herbaceous, we might think of them as Mediterranean plants. Selenes and Scutellaria and helianthemums, a lot of plants you guys probably struggle with here since it's so dry in this area. Salvias, there's a lot of species of salvias in the Fragana. You notice there's no trees, there's plenty of rocks, and everything kind of looks like a botanic gardens where all the plants are spaced out and laid out. And I was shocked to learn when I was there, in our Colorado gardens we think of daphnes as being shade and a little more moisture, and we think of the acantholimon, or prickly thrift, in the carnation family. We think of that as being in the cactus garden. And in Turkey, I saw the things growing on top of each other, and realized, oh no, there is this sort of dry intermediate zone. Daphnes grow drier than I thought, and acantholimons grow wetter than I thought. Other amazing endemics in the Caucasus to the steppe zone in Fragana. Like this little dude, I can't even pronounce its name, and it has multiple other genus names now, but it's in the Orobanchaceae, which is the broom rapes, is that right? They are parasitic plants. There's no leaf on them. And I really had to spread this picture around because when I first researched it, I didn't find many pictures on the internet, and most books just had illustrations. A gorgeous parasite.
What's the size of that plant?
That's the size of it, maybe a foot or two high.
But the actual flower?
The flower, let's go back. The flower might be an inch or two wide. Really stands out in a place like this. A little red dude does. This might be a more traditional view of the steppe that we're used to. This environment reminds me of a High Country Gardens catalog cover, just from the colors there. You have stipa brush strokes among salvia, and in the west, in our steppe in the west, we have sagebrush or rabbit brush or greasewood, and this is an astragalus scrub, a spiny astragalus. I think That's microcephalus or angustifolius, I'm not sure. A great mixture of plants happen in this environment. I think I mentioned salvias, and there's plenty of geophytes, plenty of bulbs are going on in here. Most of these sites are characterized by a little drier summer, not always terrifically dry, but definitely drier than the spring and fall. And among the geophytes in this area was Iris paradoxa. This was one of my holy grails, one of the reasons I went to the Caucasus not knowing anything about botany or really anything about plants. But I grew this at home and really wanted to see it in its native range, and just blew my mind away and floored me to see it in its native place. You can see how small the leaves are, falcate leaves, like hawk talon shaped leaves. Not all the plants were blooming, and there were 3 divisions of iris represented just in this one area. There was a Juno iris, I think Iris caucasica, and Iris pumila, a bearded iris. An absolutely gorgeous plant. It comes in different forms, grows from Iran, Armenia, and Georgia, but a special plant and a slow-growing plant. Moving higher in elevation, cruising around Georgia, in the snowmelt areas, I'm accustomed to seeing buttercups, anemones, and calthas in the mountains in Colorado. In the Caucasus, they have snowdrops. This is Galanthus platyphilus. I didn't realize they got as big as these plants are, and some of them stood almost 2 feet tall. I'm not sure how dry it gets in the summer. I'm guessing relatively dry. It's a mountain environment, I think a beech forest. But in the spring, it's wet. There's literally flowing water in the gravelly soil. So these plants are growing in water. It was so wet. So they do like the water. Human impact is everywhere. I expected to see, this is what you expect in South America or Asia, but in Georgia, they're still out trashing something that you and I would give chickens' teeth to get a hold of this plant, and someone had their picnics next door and threw it there. It's a gorgeous plant. While I was in Georgia, I knew vaguely that there was a certain gentleman there, and I was hoping I might run into him while I flew into Georgia to get to Armenia. But I ran into the group that he was traveling with and met all these incredible people from the AGS, which is Britain's version of NARGS. And later what I find out, they're all flipping famous. Some of them were authors of books I owned. Because I was deeply intimidated, I'm not gonna lie. I was pretty quiet, but they were kind enough and invited me to go with them on, I think it was a 10-day excursion throughout Georgia with the Georgian botanists. 2 of these folks were Bob and Renvig Wallace. Does anyone grow fritillaria here? I got a few frit lovers. I imagine your reddish summer limits how many frits you can grow without cover. These 2 are the god and goddess of the fritillaria world over in the UK. They're retired and they travel everywhere collecting and photographing fritillaria. They know everything there is about them. They're a fun group. And Bob Sharman's the, I think, editor or secretary of the Frit group in Britain. He was really fun and just very disarming and helped me feel a little more comfortable around all of these towering people. The fellow who actually truly invited me was Mr. Colin Mason. He's a galanthophile. And someone told me, I know it's hard to picture an entire garden of nothing but galanthus, but try really hard, because this guy does it. He's a galanthus nut. And he's an expert in what's called twin scaling, a funny way of propagating with bulbs, since galanthus are fairly slow from seed and fairly slow from division. There's a way of dividing them to mass produce them. He's an expert. Now, I wasn't lying, Tony. Look at that. That is a yellow galanthus platyphilus. They exist out there. I sent them to a buddy in Canada, and he didn't really quite know what to do with that. I think he lost it. But the galanthus people go nuts for this stuff. They'll pee their pants to see this plant. Other geophytes out there include the Coridlus marshalliana. They've got 3 or 4 species. This one's also known as cava. Actually, I was at Tony's place, so I learned that Coridlus in general are not widely used here, and I can see why Climax is there. But it's a beautiful plant and super diverse, very, very diverse. There are other species that really ought to be tried. Because they're so diverse, everyone in any corner growing in any climate really should try different species of Coridlus. Grow a handful, kill most of them, and find out which ones are good. For us, these things come up about now, and they bloom and they're gone by Mother's Day. So we can have, you know, some amazing show that's completely free in our garden for space. The whole leaves and everything are gone. It's a good plant and underused. Another gentleman that was in the group was Henrik Zetterlund. Has anyone heard of him or know this fellow? Henrik is, I'm not sure what his title is at Gothenburg Botanic Gardens, but he's a great towering plantsman. He's responsible for, I think really he's brought a lot of biodiversity through the Gothenburg Botanic Gardens. The Ralston's a great example of a plant-oriented, diversity-driven botanic situation. And Henrik, I think, is one of the driving forces in Sweden for making that happen up there at Gothenburg Botanic. And he's also very photogenic. He's just an epic character, very quiet, and he's got a thing for the Grateful Dead, which is very endearing. In the Intermountain West and in the rock garden world, people know this little plant of cactus garden fame, and he's responsible for introducing it to horticulture. It's called Buchanixia cabulica, or Aeoniopsis. It's basically related to the statice, the limoniums, Argoniolimons. Has an ugly little flower, but the leaves on this biennial plant are just stunning, totally worth having and letting them reseed around our dry rock gardens. So when I met him, I think I'd seen his name associated with this plant. I thought, wait, is that your plant? That's you? You know, I was starstruck at the time. This is the fellow I knew was going to be there. At the time I was a serious bulb collector. Janis Ruksans, he's just put out another book on crocus. Any crocus nuts in here? Any like crocus? He just wrote the new pictorial monograph. And his last few collections of subspecies he didn't have, he was taking out on this journey. And I learned how to find crocus leaves in grass from him. And there's a way. It's color and length of leaves. So if you can just train your eye to see stiff, upright leaves of a certain length, because the crocus leaves are all the same length, whereas grass will be different lengths. He's a bulb nut. He might be one of the authorities on bulbs on this planet. Temperate bulbs, excuse me, cool plant bulbs. And he also wrote Buried Treasures, which is a really fun sort of plant hunting book, which I'm sure Bobby keeps by his bedside. But the last fellow, and I didn't realize just how fortunate I was to meet this guy because he would die the summer after I met him, is Jim Archibald. And he was a globetrotter who brought in seeds from everywhere he went, and has probably increased the flora of horticulture in so many climates, perhaps more than anyone else. At least Panioti in Denver believes he's had the greatest impact as a plant hunter and introducer of new species in the last century. I'm not sure if that's true, if there are other climates that outdo us, but even in western Colorado and Front Range in Denver, in a big suburban area there, a lot of the plants, even things that are making it into landscape horticulture, some of them were his collections, brought into the trade, given to plantsmen, getting spread around. So the man's a giant, and he was just quietly enjoying the flowers on this trip. He wasn't expounding on anything. He wasn't loud or anything. He was just really enjoying the flowers. He deeply humble dude. He left his wife back home because it was very important to pollinate the peonies while he was away. So he was out taking pictures of Caucasus iris. That's this guy up close. There's a chance you guys could grow this, but it would need extreme drainage. Maybe a crevice garden. And there's a reason I think you guys could grow this in a crevice garden. There's a crevice gardener that lives in a place where she does get afternoon rainstorms. So moisture in the summer, which these guys tend not to like, is a possibility to get around. They need extreme drainage. They tend to grow in the spring and the fall, semi-dormant in the summer, and they just don't seem to handle water at all. But the trick that, oh yes, another gratuitous Armenian picture. There's color going on here. But the way to cultivate this creature is to grow it in a layer of gravel and let the roots grow through the gravel. The rhizome could be on the surface or just barely under the gravel, but that way the rhizome literally never is wet, ever. And the way to cultivate that creature is with lots of money. This is by far more elegant. I'd rather take this one home. It's called Iris elegantissima, and part of its character traits is that this sort of base of the bud is very narrow, whereas other ones are fat.
How tall is
You know, it depends on water. I've noticed the ones in nature that we saw were only 10 inches tall. This was my plant. I gave it to Tanya before I traveled, and it's about 2 feet tall. And for a tiny plant, it's a huge flower. And there's a whole society dedicated to hybridizing this with other bearded irises to come up with these really showy and exotic yet growable ones. This is growable, but it needs a special situation. You can't throw it at the ground and expect it to grow like other species of iris. It's a gorgeous thing, it really is. Now, going up in elevation and sticking with the iris theme, this is Iris pumila poking out. Skip forward so I see where I'm going. Yes. Heading up in elevation was an ecology I really hadn't thought of or seen before that we can learn from as gardeners, and that is the snow-smothered environment, where it's dominated by herbaceous plants that die to the ground in the winter, and then the snow smacks it down and smashes it down and flattens it. And you can see all the remnants of herbaceous grasses being completely flattened so that really short things like Iris pumila can come up in the spring and have room. I've only seen one garden that I know of, a home garden, where everything was herbaceous like that, and she started her spring with tiny little bulbs. In nature, the examples Scylla rosenii. These guys benefit from the initial melting of the snow or the water coming down in the winter, coming up through these plants, which or coming up in an environment where in the summer the herbaceous plants stand 2 or 3 feet tall, and there's no way for a 2 or 3 inch plant to compete with those, other than coming up way before all of them. So the early flower gets the pollinator, as it were, and I was quite stunned to see that action, to see this ecology. It also reblooms a little bit, which makes it good for our gardens. Is Scylla a bulb for you guys? Do you grow any Scyllas? Probably reseeds pretty well for you too, actually. Is that almost a weed, maybe? Okay. No, not quite. Well, the Scyllas are amazing. They're really close to blue and should be grown more. This is a rare muscari that was growing in the same environment, which is really what Henrik Zetterlund had come basically to see this plant. And another plant which would just floor me and leave me happily scarred for life until I could cultivate them myself was the gentians. Somewhere back there is Mount Elbrus, which is the highest mountain in Europe. This is Gentiana verna subspecies angulosa. It's really, really blue, and it grows quite wet in the spring. The thing I noticed about it that was special, I'm going to try the laser feature, watch out everybody, is this darker blue band, which I guess a characteristic like that can just make you lose yourself, but that's it for me. When I saw that blue band, wow, I've got to build a whole garden just to accommodate this thing. Is that not the calyx? Yeah, the calyx from which it comes. I want to note that it's winged, it's got keels on it, like these fantastic wings, and it also smells like roses, which is really novel, incredibly novel. I didn't know gentians were fragrant. I'd never really seen them until I was there. But where they're growing, this incredibly blue creature, there's a reason that there's nothing woody around it. That snow and those elements, more laser action here, is wiped out by even glaciers. We had the glaciers at some points, but this is an avalanche chute. There's a reason that there are no houses nor trees in this area. The avalanches come down and just clean that thing every winter, keeping herbaceous stuff out. And it looks like some shrubs have made it over here. Looks like they're fairly recent. But it's completely cleaning the woodies out and leaving room for the herbaceous stuff and watering them when it comes up in the spring. This is truly fascinating and not difficult to recreate in the garden, really. A special plant that was coming up in there is Fritillaria colina. This one might be worth a try for you guys because it is from the mountains and gets some summer moisture. Usually that tends to be the thing that kills Fritillaria is summer moisture when they're dormant. Who doesn't like a flower that's checkered? I mean, blue is pretty novel, but then checkered? That's great. Sign me up. Going up, get a little farther in elevation and getting steeper. When we're actually getting into the rocks, is this dramatic environment. Are there any birders in here? Any bird-loving people? I was told by a birder before I went, you know, thank goodness we have these hobbies. Like, he's a birder, and what he knew about the Caucasus was this large bird called the bearded vulture, or the lammergeier. I mean, I don't know why else this gentleman would know about the Caucasus, but he knew about it. And when he heard I was going there, he said, look out for the lammergeier. This is big, big bird. And I expected, oh, it's something rare, I'll never see it. Oh no, they were all over the place in these tall areas. Kind of like the vultures that you guys have, the turkey vultures, but a big brown, sort of like a brownie brown, almost, and with a white head. Almost, I mean, looking a little bit like a bald eagle from the States, but huge animals. I didn't realize how big they were until I saw a shadow go over. And I thought, where's the airplane, you know? Steep and dramatic. This is, talk about drainage, right? Tony was showing me at his place how some plants seem to do a lot better on a slope, his euphorbias. And these slopes do give us a lot of our great garden plants. I mean, you can imagine that gentiana, verna, angulosa, just an inch tall. Now that's about 18 inches to 2 feet tall with grass in the summertime. There's things hiding out in there. Dianthus, anybody heard of carnations? This is where they came from. I wouldn't have expected this to be their native habitat, but so many years in cultivation, they've become different animals for sure. And I understand this is one of the gentians you guys are capable of growing. And there it was. I almost didn't recognize it. I thought that must be some exotic. No, wait a minute. That's just the summer gentian. I almost pitched my tent on top of it. They're pretty frequent. And also in that zone, I didn't include was Scabiosa caucasica. How are the scabiosas for you? Probably not great. Pincushion flowers? They probably mildew, don't they? Well, for us in slightly drier places than North Carolina, Scabiosa is a huge, important plant in our gardens, and this is where it comes from. I think I'm just showing oh yes, adventures. If it weren't for plants, that's my tent. It's camping there. And the two different creeks, one of them was this weird blue-gray, sort of glacial runoff, and this one was pretty clear. They were coming from different places. Incredibly steep and deeply, easily accessible. That's one of the hazards of camping. You really think you're out there in the middle of nowhere, and then you wake up on the side of your tent, and shepherds coming to ward them away. So he was trying to speak Russian with me the whole time. I think it's because he was drunk. He was really drunk. But I was foreign, so I must be Russian. I kept telling him, no, I'm American. And I had like 7 words of Georgian to speak with this guy. The Georgian folks are incredibly lovely. I actually encourage you to go there. No, it's not a war-torn country. It's really quite safe. They're very close friends of ours diplomatically. A small country, maybe the size of Colorado, but it's cheap to travel there and easy to get there. My one-way ticket to Tbilisi was $700-something. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. I had a lot of fun with these folks. It is really, really, really beautiful. I'm not going to lie. Getting steeper yet come the inspirations for the crevice gardens, which you're going to hear an earful about today, I promise you. I apologize, too. The natural crevice gardens of the Caucasus, I think this is a basalt. Most of the rocks in the area were basalt. They have mixed limestone, granites, it's all there. It's a mountain range, so there's a lot of different varieties of rock. That's perfect drainage, all right. This place is pretty darn moist. It gets buried in snow, totally buried in snow in the winter, to the point that when you're driving on one of the roads, you can't look outside of the road. You're in almost a tunnel with no roof of snow. It's so deep. The creatures growing in these cracks surprised me. Like Veronica lewinensis, I understand it's so-so for you guys, but it's becoming a very important plant in a lot of places in the country. And easy to grow ground cover, and there it was growing in nature in the rock crevices, and we're using it as a ground cover nowadays. And sedum spurium, I know sedums don't do well for you either, but it's another common garden plant in North America, which is so important. And there it is growing in essentially an alpine place. That's perfect drainage, all right. It's vertical, for sure. The plants will grow there in nature. So they'll grow there in the garden. I'll show you how later today. Right, there we go. Here's the definition of a chasmophyte right here. Let's see. First I have to find the plant and then laser it out to you. Here's a campanula right there. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what kind of rock this is, but it had narrow fissures. That's Campanula betulifolia. And you can see why it doesn't like being wet. You can guess, it just forgot what wet was. And so its access to moisture is deep within that rock, which is probably a slightly porous rock. And it hangs out there and lives for a very long time in those situations. Getting a little closer, it's a beautiful plant. And if we can provide drainage to it, it's actually really easy to grow. Since I've grown it in a nursery, which is a pretty moist environment, even in Colorado, I know that you guys can start to pull off some of these campanulas in a crevice garden. Does it sound like I'm selling crevice gardens? Well, I am. Well, I am. So get used to it. It's, I just noticed the plant behind it, actually. I was not paying attention, I tell you what. Pictures are a good thing. You probably see this on the NARG seed exchange lists every year, Androsis vilosa. It's got a wide distribution, and not only was it way up in the mountains, but it was down a little bit lower in pastures, right up against rocks. And I found this interesting, that the things we traditionally think of as alpine can make their way lower if they lost that competition from the taller plants, like Sempervivum caucasicum. I know it's a crassulaceous thing that is not a big North Carolina plant, but it's important for the rest of us in North America. And there it grows on the edge of things, just escaping the grass. And there are other Caucasians I didn't see that are completely worth growing in a garden. Sedum pilosum is subalpine, so there's a good chance it's worth growing for you. It's also a biennial that reseeds madly, so you have lots of seeds to try different environments with it. And it only takes up 2 inches, so there's no excuse not to grow it and try it in the garden. And this guy's a stunner, although I'm pretty sure it wouldn't do well for you, I'm afraid. I brought a couple seedlings, which I'll take to Asheville. I'm sorry. They're a little cooler up there. It looks every bit like a sempervivum, but it's a sedum, and it's biennial. So it produces the sempervivum-like rosette the first year, and explodes into flower the next year, and dies. I love a plant like that. That's great. Campanulas. There's probably 150 species of campanulas in that area. And given that, from everything from low elevation to high elevation, from dry to wet, there's a campanula for you guys in North Carolina, I'm sure of it. You don't have to grow all 150 Caucasian campanula species, but we'll get some seeds to you guys and you can try them. They're very worth growing. In nature in the summer, they're ugly little rats hanging out of the rocks. But I recognized the leaf as a campanula and took some seeds and grew them out at home. And they taught me that even in a 2-inch pot, this plant is hardwired to produce a taproot for cliff growth. Hardwired. That thing came unraveled in that pot. And no matter what kind of pot I grow it in, except for a bottom root pot, they'll grow these incredible taproots. So obviously the plant is not expecting water here, probably doesn't want any. And it will grow in a wet crevice for me in the nursery. So I really think you guys should try crevice gardens if you're up for an experiment. You can grow some things you couldn't grow before. And it's not the prettiest campanula I've ever grown, but it reblooms, dang it, and that's cool. That's really cool. And it'll grow in a styrofoam box for me. It took me, that's a nice misspelling, good work. This is Petrophylla, a lover of rocks. It took me 3 years actually to identify it because the first plant I had that bloomed, I didn't get all the flower parts pressed at the same time, so I could take it to the flora of the USSR at Denver Botanic Gardens and start measuring things to identify it. So it was a while. I didn't know what this plant was when I saw it. It's lovely, and I think I'm going to hang on to it just because it reblooms. It's awfully nice. It's got a nice little flower. There are other things I want to bring home from Georgia. There are other things I want to go home with me, as it were. There are other species of campanulas out there. Tubular flowers, purple to blue to white. There's even some yellow ones out there. And then Teo, her friend, he said, "Do you think she's beautiful?" And I said, "Yes, of course she's beautiful." He says, "Well, will you marry her?" No. They just couldn't understand that, the logic here. And that's the logic written all over her face. What do you mean? I saw Tony's got an anosma going there. There are a lot of species of anosma from high to low places, and in those lower places where they get humidity in the summer along the Black Sea, I'll bet those anosmas are ones you should try. A lot of this is a borage, it's in the borage family. Most of them are bright yellow. There's a blue one, isn't there, maybe? and yellows and pinks, mostly yellow. And they rebloom, which is nice, and they have a nice architecture for a plant. There, man, I was not even going to try to identify the anosmos. I think that the botanists really didn't describe everything that's there. But as much as the Caucasus has been on the radar of plant hunters for a very long time, there are plants that I'd never seen in the trade before, never heard of. I took one look at that and had no idea. I was in love, but I had no idea what it was. And thank goodness got some pictures and know some people who know a lot more than I do. This is a Moltkia cerulea. There's a Balkan one called Moltkia petrea, which has been around in rock garden horticulture for a while. I had never seen this one before, and when I did a Google search of it, when I finally identified it, nothing came up. So despite being so perused by plant hunters, they might have been from a certain place or went there at a certain time and they missed things. So there's yet more out there, and it finally showed up on a seed list this year, Mr. Wojtek Holubek. I pictured him. I don't have to make an argument, that is gorgeous, just gorgeous. It has such a wide distribution from Turkey to Georgia, and I think even Azerbaijan, that it wouldn't surprise me if there's a form that would grow well for you guys. The two-tone flower thing is pretty hot, that's nice. I'm certain you'd need some sun for that. Think of this as the sunny rocky pulmonaria, really, is what it is. That is the end of my talk, actually. So the point is there's more out there, there's more to be done, but the Caucasus is that happy medium mountain range for us, and a lot of exploration should still be done. And I hope you think it's a little more important than just a place where people are fighting with the Russians. Anyway.
Thank you. That was fascinating. You know, and some of those pictures look to me sort of reminiscent of Western North Carolina. Sounds like more like Pacific Northwest. I bet you've got it all going on. Yeah, so the only thing that would make your talk better is bringing Kim here personally. You can only do so much. Okay, any questions for Ken?
What month was this?
Let's see, I was there in April and May, and then August. So most of those flowers are April, May. But just like here, the higher you go up in the mountains, the earlier in the season you are, really. Does that cover you? Yeah. Other questions?
I'm interested in the logistics. Other than the few days that you were with the British group, did you have a guide or were you on your own?
I was on my own, which
Good grief.
There were such lovely people, and you'd never be left to, you know, I think only once did I pay for a hotel there. They were so warm and hospitable, you know. Oh, absolutely, totally. Yeah, there's no way they're going to let someone traveling to their country stay on the streets or whatever, or go to a hotel more or less. You know? Even if there's no English spoken in the house, they were incredibly hospitable people.
So you rented a car and...
I didn't rent a car, actually. I'm not a fan of driving, so I just took buses. And there are a lot of little buses. Most people in the world don't drive half as much, or a quarter, a tenth of as much as we do. So there are little buses to all the tiny villages which run really frequently. And I found it incredibly easy to get around. And my only limitation was my own knowledge of the plants and where on earth I was going. I would recommend it to you guys, actually.
Can you lead us on a trip there, maybe?
What's that? And there is, I think I put this Mr. Shamil Shetikari. He's a Georgian botanist, and he works at the Botanic Gardens in Tbilisi and the university in Tbilisi. But when on his weeks off, he leads little eco tours of the place. And green tours is one that's internationally known. I'm not sure how much those things run, but you're going with a birder and a botanist, or a combination thereof. They can show you things around, take you to the best places. But there's something to be said for just stumbling into random places and running into random things. I mean, I actually wanted to see tulips, and I never saw one in my entire trip because I didn't know where I was going. Most of the places were too wet. So a bit of oblivion can be pretty useful.
So you just ask people, where should I go to just generally see?
I headed towards the mountains because they're a little more interesting. Just pick a village in the mountains and go to where all the buses are huddled and say, who's going to Stephansminda? You know, get in here. You know, smell his breath, see if he's been drinking. You know, yeah, that's how it went there. And Turkey's much the same way. I mean, We have quite a view of Turkey in this country because the majority of them are Muslims. They're not Arabs, which is very different. And they're incredibly friendly folks too, but they have this amazing bus system which makes Greyhound look like child's play. Their buses run all the time, everywhere, really fast and really clean, these sort of chartered bus things, and really cheap too. So really, you know, I encourage folks to try to go off the grid a little bit. It's not that tough, really.
In Georgia.
And in Georgia and in Turkey, in those two places, in Georgia and Turkey.
But you must have had to have some accountability somewhere, and serendipity doesn't always.
No, it doesn't.
match with
There are times when you
accountability.
get to a place and this place is pretty boring. There's nothing here. There was a one time or two where the bus dropped me off at some weird time and there was no other bus. I had to wait for a while. So yeah, I mean, serendipity. You're going to have adventures, maybe a late night somewhere. But I was really quite humbled to learn, or to just see how nice everyone was. I don't want to say they're nicer than Americans, but to just a stranger who obviously has a need on the street, they were much quicker to help someone random who obviously was not in control of what was going on.
So when you were invited to join the group of famous plants people, did you? Did you go on their tour?
Oh
with
yeah,
them? You
oh
did?
yeah. I was no fool about it. It was, I mean, I don't know, I was really quite intimidated by all of them because I was new to rock gardening and plants in general. And I felt like I ought to know something to be with them, but I did learn a lot from them still. And they were all just incredibly lovely. Plant people are nice. You notice that? You guys are plant people.
That was quite fortuitous for you to
It really
encounter
was.
them.
It really was. I mean, I don't know, maybe just on a personal scale, it was fortuitous. I didn't learn a whole lot about plants because I didn't understand what they were talking about. But,
I have to point out that this is the male perspective.
yes, that's true. That is very true.
Women can't get it. I've been in all
That's
these cases
true.
you're talking about.
No, that's a good point.
And women simply cannot do what you've done.
That's
It is
true.
not possible.
You know,
So have a male with you.
actually, so I met women travelers when I was out there, and I asked them about this because, you know, in places that are more easterly, like India and whatnot, they have a really strange view of what Western women are like. They get it from, I don't know, television sources or something, and they think we're all much more, so they think we're all much more promiscuous, and that on the ground is pretty rough. I'm really interested in that actually, and have met and asked a lot of lady travelers about it, and they seem to go one of two ways about it, who are traveling alone as women. They go one of two ways. One Irish gal was just happy-go-lucky and just acted really oblivious, you know? She told me when she was walking down the street in Bombay or something, some man grabbed her, and she just said, "Oh, it's funny," just shrug him off. So she was kind of, you know, going that route with it. But most of the women that I met traveling were, I don't know, they'd make eye contact with strangers and all to make sure, you know, like, I'm watching you, and I don't know, they're just wearing a certain boundary, I suppose, and they had to actually build that boundary to get around. Because that is a totally legitimate concern. It is done. There are single lady travelers who do nuttier things than I ever did or thought of. But they have to be careful. They do have to be careful. A French friend of mine went hitchhiking around the world by herself, and she was. I always felt much more indignant about it than she did. She'd tell me about going to a beach in Mexico, and then she'd meet the owner of the beach, and he says, "Yeah, you can sleep on my beach, you know, and eat my restaurant. By the way, will you have sex with me?" And I thought she should be very angry and indignant about that, but no, she'd just say, "Oh, no thanks." You know? And actually, in hitchhiking in Turkey, I was propositioned by a gentleman. Actually, he gave me a ride to the bus station, and he very nervously, the only word he knew in English was sex. And I was just trying to play oblivious and keep the humor and say, "Oh no, I'm a religious man," which in Turkish this doesn't mean praying, by the way. This is praying. So it works. You know, I think it is good to know. And there are times to cover your back to, if you don't know this is, to keep out of dark, nasty corners. But yeah, you've got to take responsibility for yourself. There's nobody to sue over there if you trip on something and hurt yourself. So yeah, that's very legitimate. sir.
Did you ever get to Armenia?
I did, actually. So my friend, the Armenian tulip collector, I did spend some time in Armenia, and I really did not spend enough time there.
Okay,
Really?
I was going to ask, I once got some seed exchange on Index 7 with the Botanic Garden in Yerevan, in the capital
Yeah.
city.
Yeah,
Did you visit that place? Is it still ongoing?
they have good botanists there, and I didn't see the Botanic Gardens. I wasn't aware of it when I went there, which is
Okay.
ridiculous.
Do you
Do
know
research
if there's
before you
a
go.
similar Botanic Garden in Jordan?
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny, the Botanic Gardens, has anyone's gone to Botanic Gardens in other countries? You know, they're different. I mean, what's that?
China.
Yeah, they're really, really different. I mean, in India, they don't have anything mechanized, so people are hand cutting the grass, and the ground is all uneven, and all the weeds are this tall because they've been cut by scissors. You know, like the Botanic Gardens are completely different, and the way they treat plant collections and the way they maintain things are totally different. But there's still botanists here and there. It's amazing the local talent and local education level, and even these small places like Giro, my tulip friend, he was doing things, saving tulips from the tulip breaking virus by cutting them at a certain stage in growth, which the Dutch people did. We're talking people who make millions of dollars a year or more off of tulip bulbs, didn't believe you could do that. And here he is, some villager in northern Armenia who figured out a technique to save a strain of tulip that was infected with tulip breaking virus, to clean the bulb. And the Dutch didn't believe him, and actually somebody visited him, like, who's this Armenian guy? And some Dutch chap stayed with him and went, oh my goodness, you have figured something out. You know, some of these heirloom Dutch varieties that all of our stock is infected. Yeah, there's local plant hunters and botanists everywhere, in the most obscure places. They don't look like our botanists, you know, you may not find them in a big building in a university behind a big fancy desk, but you know, there's sort of highly sophisticated individuals out there, and that's something I didn't know. Against my credit, I didn't realize that. How the level of expertise that's out there. The difference is that the culture has less resources. You know, the people are not dumber; they just don't have as much money or time to make the Botanic Gardens look like these.
Any other questions?
That wasn't too long an answer for that.
Okay, thanks again.